te Tātari, Raraunga, Kounga, which I've come to learn means qualitative data analysis. Oh, now that's not working. So ko ai tēnei e kōrero ana ko maunga haumi tōku maunga, ko ai pāua tōku awa, ko horauta tōku waka, ko te aitanga māhaki me Ngāti Porou o ku iwi, ko te whānau taupara tōku hapu, ko takipu tōku marae, ko Tara McAllister ahau, he kairanga hau matua hau ki te manawa haukura. Ko tēnei taku tau tuarua ki konei. Yes, that's a little bit of an introduction, but I kind of wanted to start with talking a little bit about my research background. And that's a really important part of the methodology or method we're going to talk about today, is knowing kind of where you come from, your experiences, and how that informs how you kind of analyze and approach and understand data as a kairangahau. So I have a background in freshwater ecology. Basically, I've spent a big chunk of my kind of research career studying our awa, with a particular focus on a really specific type of algae that grows in a lot of our awa, and we worry about it because it produces toxins and kills dogs. So my background is more in quantitative kind of scientific research, but I'm here talking about qualitative research today. And I guess I just want to invite anyone in our team, some of who and other people who are here today, to contribute at any point to the kind of kōrero that we're going to have today. And also feel free to ask pātai during or put any kōrero in the chat. So just invite people to contribute. I've done a lot of research around racism in higher education, and that's probably more the qualitative side of my research. And I was thinking about kind of my positionality as a researcher, and I am very much a product of Western universities. And so, doing my degree, doing my PhD, did all that. And then since then, I've kind of been on a process of unlearning the things that I was taught about science, unlearning things and kind of learning more and growing as a kairangahau. And I'm really thankful to be here at Te Wānanga o Aotearoa as an opportunity to kind of further grow as a kairangahau Māori. So the kind of general vibes of what we're going to cover today is I'm going to start by talking about a rangahau process and kind of try to link all the kōrero that we've already had about different methods, about the kind of purpose of our rangahau. I'm going to talk about qualitative versus quantitative research, and I'm really going to focus on reflexive thematic analysis as a kind of method to analyze data that we might collect. I'm going to kind of give an example of how I've used that, and also I'm going to invite Shelley to come and talk a little bit about the method that she has developed through our Tauira Māori project, and then hopefully we can have a little bit of a discussion and a wānanga if anyone has any questions or wants to share their kind of experiences of doing qualitative research. So I was kind of thinking broadly about the rangahau process, and I kind of always start with an idea, a question, a problem that I want to learn about, an aim. That's kind of the first part of rangahau, and then you're thinking about your methodology, your method, how you're going to answer that question, how you're going to understand that problem. You're thinking about how you're going to approach it. Then you do the mahi, then you get a bunch of data, and then what we're going to focus on today is analyzing that data. And I chose these squiggly lines just to try and illustrate that rangahau isn't always a really straightforward process. You might have an idea, you might have a pātai, and then decide on a method, and then realize actually that method's not going to give me what I want, or not the best way to approach it, and then you go back. So just wanted to kind of emphasize that it's a really iterative process. And this is just a rangahau process. There are so many different ways to do rangahau, and it depends on your kind of positioning, where you're coming from, your understanding of the world. So it can look like many different things to many different people. And this is kind of my process, doesn't mean it's going to exactly be yours. So I wanted to start talking a little bit about the differences in qualitative and quantitative data. And I always get these mixed up because they sound the exact same. But basically, quantitative data is numbers. So you might make things like graphs to try and understand patterns in data, whereas qualitative data is stories, words, and you kind of interpret them. So two very different types of data. And I would say I'm most experienced in looking at quantitative data, so looking at numbers, trying to see relationships between numbers, but today we're going to talk about qualitative data. And I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit of an example of work that I've done, which is more quantitative. So several years ago, I was nearly finished my PhD, and I was thinking and kind of reflecting on my 8 years of studying at New Zealand universities. And I really wanted to know how many Māori professors there are, how many Māori academics there are. So my question was, how many Māori academics are there actually? Because I felt like there weren't that many. And then basically I went and collected data on the number of Māori academics that there are in each university. And that kind of quantitative data, those numbers, were really powerful in describing how many Māori academics there were, and kind of allowed people to advocate for change within our universities. And so my experience then was mainly with numbers. I think in terms of providing evidence, numbers are often harder to hide from. When you're talking to the government or institutions, they can't really hide from numbers. But what I kind of subsequently learned through doing more qualitative research was, numbers are numbers and they tell a particular story, but the kind of depth and richness that you get from qualitative data, from listening to people's stories, from listening to people's experiences and their views and their opinions, are just, I was really blown away when I first started doing qualitative research by the kind of depth and richness of people's thoughts and experiences. And there is also a lot of power in speaking to our stories, beyond numbers. So reflexive thematic analysis is, I would say, a really common qualitative method that's used to analyze data. It's pretty popular globally, I would say. A lot of researchers use this. And I'll talk through each of the kind of individual steps of reflexive thematic analysis. But broadly, kind of speaking, it involves being reflective of or reflective of your own positionality. And I think my observations of Māori researchers is that we are very aware of our positionality, whereas I found in my time working in universities, people would kind of just pretend to be objective rather than leaning into actually having biases and thinking certain ways because of your experiences. So a really important component of reflexive thematic analysis is leaning into your own experiences, and being aware of your positionality, your biases, and any assumptions that you might hold. Um, uh, some Māori researchers think that there's a good alignment between reflexive thematic analysis and kaupapa Māori research. Um, I'm kind of two minds personally about that. I and maybe Shelley will speak to this, but I kind of feel like we just use reflexive thematic analysis sometimes because it's easy, and I often wonder, are there better methods that have their foundations in te ao Māori that we can lean into understanding data? Um, but yeah, that's just my own kind of whakaaro. Um, yeah, RTA welcomes subjectivity. So we don't have to pretend like scientists often do that our kind of understanding of the world impacts the way that we view data. It's a pretty flexible method, which people like. There's no kind of super hard and fast ways of doing it, so it can be adapted to kind of whatever works for you. Um, and there's a big kind of movement around the themes that you create don't just emerge, you create those themes through your thinking and your understanding of data. Um, yeah, so that's a kind of broad overview. And I guess when you're kind of at this stage, this might be the stage where you've done some interviews and you've got your data, you've done a survey and people have answered your partai, so you've got a whole bunch of data, and this is a method to kind of make sense of the data, to draw patterns out, to kind of understand your data. So there's basically 6 kind of general steps: data familiarization, coding. You kind of make your initial themes, you develop and review your themes, you refine, you define, and you name your themes, and then you're writing or creating your kind of output. And we'll go through individually each of these themes and kind of hopefully gain a bit of an insight into using them. And it was actually really helpful for me because I wasn't trained in this, to kind of go through this process of trying to understand how you're actually supposed to do it. And then thinking about my process of how I usually analyze data with this particular method. So the first step is data familiarization, and it's getting to know your data, it's sitting with your data, it's reading your data, it's putting your data down and coming back to your data. It's kind of thinking deeply about your data and coming to know what your data says and how you kind of interpret that. So yeah, it's a process of immersion. You're reviewing your transcripts, your interview transcripts. A lot of people, I know we use transcription software to kind of, you might have recorded an interview and then you're getting that recording into a written form so you can analyze the data, but writing it manually transcribing it really helps if you have the time with the data familiarization, because you have to listen to it and then write it. You can also re-listen to your interviews as part of your data familiarization process. You can make notes on your reactions and initial thoughts. I always make notes of how reading it makes me feel. Like if it elicits really strong emotions in me, I'm like, whoa, that's really powerful and something that I want to come back to and sit with and kind of think about more deeply. So it's helpful to notice how reading certain things makes you feel. And you kind of can start to identify some patterns through this process. You might say, oh, this person said this thing, and that's kind of similar to what this other person said, but actually it's really different than what this other person said. Um, Yeah, so it's kind of an iterative process trying to make yourself familiar with your data. Um, yeah, so that's kind of stage one, becoming familiar with your data. The next step is coding, which I like stationery, and so these are my post-its and my highlighters, which are really great for coding, because I like to kind of color coordinate everything, and it makes it easier to understand in my brain. I think in James's workshop, he was talking about how he talked a little bit too much in some of his interviews, and so coding is when you can get rid of stuff which is not helpful. Like if someone went on a massive tangent that wasn't actually about the kaupapa that you were talking about, or where did you get? Yes, that's a very important part. I will send the link later because it's quite hard to find. I think I had to buy it from overseas, to be honest, which was quite an investment, but that it's just so worth it to have so many different colors and them standing up nicely on your desk. Yeah, so you can get rid of any data which isn't particularly helpful at this stage. So you just want to code the stuff that's meaningful. You want to document why you're coding things a certain way, reflect on your interpretations, and think about how your positionality informs and shapes the codes that you choose. Consider how others may code it. Don't be afraid to change codes. And yeah, coding is a way to organize heaps of data and kind of make sense of data. So I'm going to talk about a particular example of how I've done it a little bit later. So we'll come back to this step. So after your coding, you can start to develop initial themes. So you group related codes, think about how they connect to each other, and again document why you chose to group certain codes into themes, and kind of consider any alternative groupings. And to be honest, I was thinking about my process of how I do reflexive thematic analysis, and I never do it alone. It's always with a group of researchers, and we kind of code it together. We create the themes together, and it's kind of a process of bouncing things off each other. Does this fit here? Does that make sense in this horopaki? Is this answering our research question? So I find there is a massive benefit of doing this process together with other people. And then you kind of develop and review your themes. You test whether the themes kind of connect with each other, examine how they interact, and you condense and refine. I think whenever I do this, I always have like way too many themes, and it becomes way too big and unmanageable. So it's a process of refining, reviewing. If you think something, do that and then leave it for a little bit and then come back to it and think, oh, does that actually fit? Is that relevant here? So yeah, sit, share, think, review, and like many of our processes, it's iterative. So you do it again, you leave it, do it again, and see if you get any other answers. When I'm kind of doing this, I always use a big whiteboard to try and connect all my ideas. Maybe I'm a visual learner, visually, and see how themes kind of interact. And so this is a paper on this very messy whiteboard. It's ended up as a research paper, but that's how it kind of, the theming started. The last two steps of the 6 kind of steps are refining, defining, and naming your themes. So kind of coming up with a really concise name for your theme, and then a definition of your theme is really important, and then linking it back to your specific research questions. The final stage of writing, it's actually a test of your themes when you start to write it out. Do they make sense? Do they connect well to each other? Yeah, so it's not just writing it up, it's you're testing the ideas, you're testing your own thinking. So that's the whole kind of process in a nutshell: data familiarization, coding, create your themes, you develop, you review them, you refine, define, and you name them, and then you're writing or you're creating, you're doing something with that data. Yeah, and I'll share a little bit about the process that we use to analyze the data in this paper. So it was called, or the specific part of it was called Seen But Unheard: Navigating Turbulent Waters as Māori and Pacific Postgraduate Students in STEM. And basically, it was a project to kind of create space for Māori and Pacific postgraduate students to tell their stories of how they experience STEM in New Zealand. Yeah, and it was a really powerful project, which showed me the power of our stories and the stories we choose to tell and the stories that are listened to. So basically, this came from a survey. So our method was using a survey, and this whole paper was about people's answer to one specific partai in the survey, which was something along the lines of, can you describe a negative experience during your time as a Māori and/or Pacific postgraduate student in STEM? And I'm not sure if it's been talked about in other workshops, but one of the things that was actually quite hard about this was some of the stories that people chose to share were actually really hard to listen to, were really hard to hear, were really kind of horrible experiences that they had. So kind of looking after each other, especially when we were coding these stories, was a really important part of our kind of rangahau. And yeah, some of the stories really affected me personally. They made me angry, they made me sad, they made me pissed off. But there was also so much power in people sharing their stories. Yeah, so when we got the data, there was kind of a core bunch of us that sat together for a day. We printed out everything. We had our millions of highlighters and different post-it notes, and we kind of went through, and we've already familiarized ourselves with the data before this, so we've read it, we're sat with it, we've read it again, and we're highlighting, we're coding, we're saying, this particular part of this person's story was about racism. This particular part was about them feeling isolated. So we're kind of creating codes about different parts of the story, and then kind of cut it out and put it in different colors, and then connecting different parts of different people's stories together to try and come up with themes. And this particular one, I think a small group of us were together for a couple of days. We did it all together through physically actually coding it on paper. And that was kind of our process. So we had already familiarized ourselves with the data, we coded, we created themes, we defined them, firstly reviewed them, and then we started writing stuff later. But this is kind of an example of, we put everything into an Excel spreadsheet, and we had, the themes, and then within every theme, because some themes can be so broad, you can also have sub themes. So we coded every part, every quote that was meaningful. into these different themes. So in the end, these were the themes that we ended up with. So the theme was institutional habit, representation, space invaders, and stranger making and decolonization. And then each of these other ones is a kind of sub theme, is a part of that broader theme. And we kind of got to this point and we decided that's way too much for one kind of paper. So I think in the end we didn't include decolonization in this paper, and we got rid of some of these sub themes, or not got rid of them, but didn't focus on them in what we wrote up because it was just way too much. And I'm going to stop talking there, and I'm going to invite Shelley to jump in and give us a kind of maybe an overview of the method that you use in the Tauira Māori project as a kind of alternative way to analyze qualitative data.
Hi. Oh, kia ora Tara. Okay. I'm just going to check if I can share. Where am I going to? A window. Let's see if this does it. Window. There it is. Okay. It's not a big, humongous thing. It's just some slides that I've put in here. Okay. Everybody see that? Kapai, thank you. All right then, so the project that we carried out last year was the Tauira Māori Success Project, and as part of that, a team of 5 of us came together, both external and internal people, and we had the beautiful task of talking to our people. And so that was the qualitative aspect. We looked after one of the qualitative aspects of the rangahau. And the people that we spoke to were the tauira themselves, the kaiako of those tauira, and then the tauira support people who looked after those tauira. So they were 3 key groups. But we followed the same process for every single group. And one of the things that we started off with was, when we came to talking about methodology and all sorts of things like that, was that because we were 5 distinct people, both Māori and non-Māori, what was a way that we could weave all of us into the process? So that was important. And we felt that because we were in a wānanga context, that we should anchor it back into the wānanga context. And so we used wānanga as our method for gathering our kōrero. And so by wānanga there, I've got a little description of how we described wānanga. So it's both a framework in its own right. It's an institution that we're part of. It's a process that we engage in. So there's both theoretical elements to it and philosophical and practical elements to it. But really it just anchored us back in Māori ways of knowing and our wānanga way of knowing too. So we chose that wānanga method. The next thing we did was we set ourselves up with this guiding whakatauki. So everything we did was guided by this whakatauki. There was no other mandate. And our whakatauki was poipoia te kākano kia puawai. So that was everything that guided, that led, that oversaw the entire wānanga process that we engaged in with all of our kai kōrero. And we broke that whakatauki down into 3 components. So poipoia, we looked at what are those factors that both nurture, but also hinder tauira when they're in their ako journey right here into ana o Aotearoa. So that was the notion of poipoia. Te kākano, what were the seeds of hope and inspiration and aspirations that they came into Te Wānanga o Aotearoa with? Because they came in with something already, and then the wānanga took on that role of nurturing and nourishing, so that poipoia, that seed, to the third aspect, which was kia puawai. And the puawai is that notion of that's what success looks like. It's the engagement, it's the graduation, it's the completing your aromatawai, it's getting to class on time. There's so many ways that success can be represented. But the key thing was that this was our whole focus. Poipoi a te kākano kia pūāwai. And so we worked on that basis. The next step that we took in there was, so we went into wānanga mode. When anybody came into the room with us, we went into wānanga mode. We started with karakia, we started with kōrero, whakawhanaungatanga. And then the first thing we did was we looked at those kākano, those seeds, and we said to them to bring something along or be prepared to share a kōrero around those seeds that brought them into our organisation. So a lot of people came with their pounamu, they came with puka puka, they came with photographs, they came with stories, experiences. The key thing in that method of wānanga was to take away some of the anxiety and the fear and the not sure what's going on in this process and make it as opening and welcoming as possible. And by anchoring it in their stories and them telling us what those seeds were, as opposed to us saying, okay, we're going to interview you and here's our 10 questions and you're going to give us your answers and we're going to record those. So we reframed our whole approach to this. The other thing that we did, being in a wānanga context, was that we had our wānanga kaimahi leading out in every takiwa that we went to. And so because I had the relationships here in Tainui, I was with Mangako Tukutuku. Tu Williams had the relationships over in Waifero and Tukarere Tauranga, so he led in that space. And Leah, who was our BBSW kaiako in Tāmaki, led in that space. So that's also part of our wānanga approach, that it was our wānanga people who were the kanohi in their particular takiwā. So we did that. And the first thing, as I said, we asked them to share those kākano, those seeds, and the richness that came from that kōrero was amazing. And the beautiful kōrero and the tears that were shared, but the stories that were shared as well, really gave us an insight into why do our people come to Te Wānanga Aotearoa? What is it that brings our tauira Māori to us? And many talked about trying to go to other places and then making that conscious decision to come here and study with us. So there you can see some of the people that came. They told us a little bit about themselves. Now, the post-its is also a very big part of our wānanga approach. And the first part, when they're telling their stories, we just had a recorder open on the table, and that was it. We left it. And if anybody asked to stop it, we turned it off. And then we carried on the kōrero until everybody felt okay again, and then we turned it back on. So there was no concerns about stopping and starting. It was just a natural part of the process that we were in. When we started to talk about what are those things that both nurture and hinder our tauira journey, those were our, so those are the kākano there, those were the seeds that brought the people into us. So you can see there, they wanted to know who they were. They wanted to discover themselves and be in their Māoritanga. They'd never experienced anything like this, so they wanted to find out what it was. They wanted to break cycles of intergenerational trauma, remembering that these are all their words, not ours. And so we had a post-it kaupapa going on, and we were able to do this both physically in the classroom, and then with an online group that we held, we were able to do this as an online process as well. And we just had post-its all around the room, we had pens all around the room, and we said, okay, up on the board there's some sheets of paper. Above the line are the things that have been supportive and nurturing and nourishing, and you'd love them. Below the line are the areas that could have been better. What are those experiences that could have been better for you? How could we improve what we deliver? All of those sorts. But we gave them contexts. And so the very centre board panel you see there is about the tauira and their personal experiences. So again, we started with them at the centre. And then we moved out to their whānau and to their living community. Then we moved out again to their hapori, to their marae, to their hapu, to their iwi, and out again to Te Wānanga Aotearoa and government. Because they all had views and opinions on a lot of these areas. And we just left that time. And our wānanga were actually probably about 3 to 4 hours long. So this was a good hour-long activity where we just talked, we roamed around the room, we had conversations. If they weren't confident about writing up their own words, we just let them talk, and we wrote kapuru, put it on the post-it and put the post-it on the board. But at the end of that big discussion, that big exercise, then we asked them to just go around and have a look at them. And if they wanted to move their post-its and put them in another place, feel free to move them around, see what everybody else had written, and then you'd see them grab a pen and start adding more kōrero in there. Because that of being in a collective space, they get inspired and encouraged by others, and then that reminds them, oh yeah, I want to say that too. And then in the bottom part there, you can see one of the wānanga sessions there with all the post-its on it, all lined up. And in the white can corner, there's a whole lot of brown sheets of paper because those were all the post-it sheets that we gathered from one takiwa. And we did this across 3 takiwa. So of course I heard you, Tara, talking about the coding and the analysing and that part of it. So we rocked up to Wellington with all of our post-its and all of our sheets of paper, and we walked into the room and we thought, okay, we're going to do thematic analysis, and we're going to, so we all went off, our 5 people into our own little spaces, and we tried to do it all by ourselves. And there was so much he manawa in that. We didn't sit right, it didn't feel right. Because the entire time throughout this, we'd been a ropu, a collective, working together, moving together. So in the end, we decided we need to do the analysis together. We need to come back together. And we went back to the post-its. And we put up clean brown sheets on the board with the same headings again. And we looked at all the post-its that we had, and then we moved them around to where we thought, this is a group of whānau here. So we thought about whānau as opposed to themes. Here's a whānau of whakaro sitting here. Here's another whānau sitting over here. And those whānau then became the themes that we eventually narrowed them down to. But we had massive numbers of themes. I think we had lots and lots and lots, and then we'd look at these 2 themes and think, oh, they have a hononga, let's bring them together. So that act of us physically moving the post-its around, conversating with each other throughout that, but also remembering, because while we were doing all of this, we were remembering what it felt like when we were back in the room with those tauira, with those kaimahi, and then thinking, oh, you know, if we're going to honour the contributions, the koha that they've given us with their kōrero, with their time, with their energy, with their lived experiences, then we need to invest just as much time in this process. So we did this for an entire day, then we went away again and we carried on doing this. We carried on the conversations, we kept talking until we eventually got to the point where we thought, here's some themes that we think resonate well with our kaupapa. So that was the whole approach that we took with the wānanga, creating this wānanga method. And it made sense because we were in a wānanga context. It made sense because we were wānanga kaimahi leading out this process. We were guided by our whakatauki at all times. And at the centre of it was always about placing that tauira voice at the very centre of everything we were doing, so that our voices didn't take over and dominate the conversation. And that's what this process ensured didn't happen. Where we did come back was into that space was when we did the report writing, and we added in all the kiko and the flesh and the hindu around it to put it together in something that was quite tangible and articulate from an academic perspective. But also we hope that if one of our tauira picked up this kōrero, they'd be able to see themselves in it and see, understand everything that had taken place. So so that's how we went down this road with the Tauira Māori project. The tensions in there for us were not everybody were open to sharing, because it did become quite emotional, and we had to honour that too and allow them their own space. But what happened after was quite a few of those ones who didn't want to share in the group came and asked if they could have a one-on-one time with us. And because there was usually 3 of us in the room, they would choose which one of us they wanted to have a kōrero with. So even in that wānanga mode, they had developed a relationship with different ones, and they'd come and sit down and then have another conversation. We always ended our wānanga with kai. So we'd always go from the kaupapa into a kaitahi. And then we'd invite whoever else will happen to be in the cafeteria or in the whare at the time to come and have a kaitahi with us. And so that was again about honouring our ways of doing things. When we go into the marae, we do the business, but we have to go and have that kaitahi together. So we were trying to stay pono to what we believed was the right way for us to do this, e ai ki te wānanga way, but also how we could anchor that in our Māori ways of knowing, doing and being. So koera, that's how we did that.
Kia ora, Shelley. Thanks so much for sharing that, a little bit about your kind of rangahau that you've been doing within the Tauira Māori project. I think that was really inspiring and a really great overview of kind of what was important in that rangahau and how you approach that. I see that Hannah has a pātai.
Yeah, kia ora korua. Thank you so much for the kōrero. I just had a pātai for Shelley. And the waranga method that you use for the analysis, I guess with my experience doing thematic analysis, I found that it's quite hard to know like when to stop and like, how, when do you feel like you've reached the end point? And I was wondering, with your experience in the waranga method, was there a way where, the group collectively felt that, yeah, we've reached where we need to reach? Yeah, does that kind of make sense? Just kind of wondering how you found that process. Yeah.
Aye. Yep, that makes sense. So we had the initial day, and we might have come up with 100 themes at the end of that one day. But then over time, the key thing was, even though we were all working remotely and disconnected to each other, we remained in contact with each other. So all our documentation was shared, our kōrero was shared, and we'd go in and put our own whakaaro there. So everybody would put their whakaaro and we'd talk about a particular theme that evolved. One of the things that I brought from a wānanga perspective, and two as well, was that some of the themes, like one of the themes came up about ako wānanga. And then I said, so in Te Wānanga Aotearoa, we have ako wānanga. Is that what you mean when you're using it as a theme? Because if so, that's a captured term, and people are going to automatically think ako wānanga that they know, and it may not be what we mean as one of our themes. And so we had to do that with every one of our themes, because we had to be sure that how we were articulating it and representing it was pono to the project that we'd just been doing, as opposed to how some of those kipa have already been captured within wider society, and again within Te Wānanga Aotearoa. So we had to have those discussions, and that's where our wānanga people were able to talk to our external peoples and say, this is our wānanga context, remembering that everything we're doing now is coming back to the wānanga, and it's going to be presented to our wānanga people before it goes external to anybody else. So the languaging was a really important. And so because of that, we did have to have a lot of conversations. But in the end, I mean, we still have lots and lots of findings, and we still had masses of recommendations, and the final report shows that. But at some point, there has to be a prioritisation, and we ended up having to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Hi.
And I just noticed in the chat that you mentioned, Hannah, which I forgot to mention, that there are software that you can use to help with coding. Yeah, do we have access to In Vivo, Becky? I'm not sure. Does cost to use it?
We have 2 licenses,
Right.
but if people are keen, like if we got lots more interest, we would explore getting more. So, there's a hand up.
Yeah, and In Vivo has been used by our evaluative team, the quality evaluation team, but it's also been used by PhD students when they're doing their analysis. And we've provided licenses, but we have to put in a tono for those.
Yeah, so if that's the kind of way that you work better in an online kind of system, then that might be a good thing to explore. It just depends how best works for your way of kind of working. I very much like printing. I don't print a lot, but for data analysis like this, I like to print it all and feel it and have it, have a big tepu and line it all up to try and kind of understand it. But yeah, you can do it lots of different ways. So thanks for highlighting that, Hannah. Does anyone else have any pātai, anything to add? Anyone? Oh, Sarah.
I was just wondering how this method relates to like a literature review, and how much you maybe go looking for certain themes that you've maybe identified in a literature review, or whether you don't really do that because you want to kind of approach it with a bit of a blank slate and be able to really listen to what emerges from the wānanga.
That's a great pātai. I have actually just used this particular method as part of a literature review. So I I wanted to know how my tauranga Māori had been incorporated, or how it connects into kind of environmental research, published environmental research. I wanted to know kind of where have we been, where should we be going in terms of the inclusion of my tauranga Māori. And so I collected, maybe 100 papers, and then I analysed them using thematic analysis to try and understand, there were a lot of papers about managing certain environments, and I kind of saw a movement from incorporation of Māori values into more maybe a rangatiratanga space to actual iwi and hapu managing their own taiao. And so, yeah, I found this method really, really helpful for understanding kind of that literature. I think your literature review also would inform the pātai that you might ask someone in an interview. It kind of provides you with the background, with the context to understanding your aim of your research, your problem. So it can be used in both of those different ways. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to add to that. Or does anyone want to share? Hannah, you're probably much better positioned to be giving this workshop than I am. So welcome you to talk about your process of how you have done this in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I can share my whakaaro on that is usually I use the literature review process, like Tara kind of mentioned there, to kind of inform the questions that I then ask and using qualitative methods and things. And so they're similar, the thematic analysis techniques you kind of use in your literature review process. And there's lots of different types of literature reviews you can do. But yeah, I usually do a literature review first before I then configure questions, because you're aiming to find like a gap, and things that haven't been asked before, and kind of tie that to current thinking and climates as well. So that's kind of, and then I'll develop the questions and then do, focus groups or interviews or what have you to gather the qualitative data. Yeah, that's usually how I do things. Yeah, and Kimi Ora's probably got more experience than I do. Kia ora.
Kia ora. I just wanted to add, I find it fantastic that you guys were able to do more of the collaborative type of research and getting that shared co-constructing of knowledge. I think with research in general, sometimes it can be quite isolating, quite a lonely journey when you're taking it on board yourself. But if you can have the ability to bring on your participants as co-researchers, co-construct that knowledge, it's such a wonderful experience. And I think sometimes that's what stands us apart as kaupapa Māori type research, is that when we can have that cultural collective kind of interaction happening and sharing that, and where everybody learns off each other. And I think knowledge shared is knowledge gained. It's just because then your own biases sort of get pushed to one side a little bit because you're sharing it. So I just want to congratulate, because I think that's fantastic that Shelley and Tara, both of you have brought together examples that really, to me, show more of a kaupapa Māori methodology of that shared stuff. So that's my comment. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Kimi ora. And yeah, just noting Hannah's comment and using metal boards, which are kind of big online post-its, I would describe, in a way that you can all contribute to something in an online space. So yeah, that's a great whakaaro as well of using Moodle boards. Yeah, Shelley also used them a lot. Any other pātai or whakaaro that anyone wants to share? I think once you see the kind of depth of information you can get from qualitative data, it's hard to go back to looking at just numbers. I mean, I like making pretty graphs, but also words are so powerful, and we can learn so much from them. Yeah.